In 1888, in London's East End, a series of murders produced one of history's most infamous unanswered questions. A suspect was never formally identified. A trial never happened. A verdict was never delivered. Yet the case never faded, because it left behind a rare combination: official records, a public panic, and a trail of evidence that still raises new questions with every rereading. This episode stays under documented facts, surviving police material, inquest-era reporting, and widely accepted timelines. Where claims are uncertain, like alleged letters or later suspect theories, we will label them clearly as disputed, because this case has a reputation for myths, and myths can bury evidence. When people say Jack the Ripper, they usually mean 5 murders police, and later researchers commonly group together: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. These deaths occurred over roughly 9 weeks in 1888 in or near Whitechapel. Whitechapel was densely populated, poor, and constantly moving. Lodging houses, late-night streets, and shifting crowds. That matters because 19th century policing relied heavily on being seen, being heard, and identifying strangers by local familiarity. If your environment is a blur of strangers, a man seen on the street is not a lead. It's a rumor. Mary Ann Nichols' body was found in the early morning of August 31st, 1888, in Bucks Row, now Durward Street. Her injuries showed a pattern that would later appear again in the series. At the time, police were still deciding: isolated murder or something connected. A pattern is not the same as a fingerprint, but patterns shape investigations: time of night, neighborhood, method, and escalation. In this series, the fear wasn't just the violence, it was the repeatability. The sense that it could happen again before anyone had time to understand what it meant. Annie Chapman was killed on September 8, 1888. With this second case, the similarities were harder to dismiss, and the public pressure intensified, because now it looked less like a murder and more like a series. Newspapers accelerated the panic. They also accelerated false leads. And in a case with limited hard evidence, too many leads can become its own problem. Detectives are forced to chase shadows. So, the case grows famous, while the truth becomes harder to isolate. On September 30th, 1888, 2 murders occurred within hours: Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes. This became known as the double event. This is a key turning point, because the events of that night produced one of the most discussed pieces of physical evidence in the entire case. Stride's case is often discussed as possibly interrupted. What matters for a facts-only approach is simpler. She is one of the 5 commonly linked cases occurring on the same night as Eddowes. And within hours, police would be dealing with the second scene in a different jurisdiction. Eddowes was killed later that same night in Mitre Square. A witness named Joseph Lawenda later described seeing a man with a woman near Church Passage shortly before the murder, though identification certainty remains limited. This detail matters because it's one of the more frequently referenced sightings associated with the canonical murders. After Eddowes' murder, a blood-stained piece of apron was found in a doorway stairwell in Goulston Street. It was later confirmed to be part of the apron Eddowes had been wearing. This is important because it suggests movement, a path away from the crime scene, and a moment where the killer may have wiped hands or discarded evidence.
Above the apron piece was chalk writing, recorded in multiple, slightly different versions by officials. The wording referenced Jews, Jews, and police feared it could trigger anti-Semitic unrest. Police Commissioner Sir Charles Warren ordered the writing removed before dawn, and that created a permanent problem. A potentially major clue was erased to prevent a riot. From a modern perspective, people argue both sides: keep it for evidence or remove it to prevent violence. The fact is, The decision was made, and the writing is gone. So we're left with reports, memory, and disagreement about what it meant, if it meant anything at all. During the investigation, letters claiming to be from the killer were sent to the press and authorities. Police did not confirm authenticity for most of them, and hoaxes were common. What's important is not the legend, but what police did in response. Scotland Yard even published facsimiles of certain letters, hoping the public might recognize the handwriting. In October 1888, George Lusk, chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, received a letter known as the "From Hell" letter, accompanied by half of a preserved human kidney. The letter was postmarked October 15th and received the next day. An examination of the kidney noted disease consistent with Bright's disease, and debate has continued over whether it truly came from Eddowes or was a hoax. So the fact is, the package existed. The kidney was real human tissue. The connection to a specific victim is disputed. The Whitechapel Vigilance Committee formed as civilian pressure mounted and fear grew. Its existence shows what the murders did to the community. Residents were no longer waiting for the state to solve it. But civilian involvement can cut both ways. It can produce tips, and it can produce hysteria. Mary Jane Kelly was killed on November 9, 1888. Her murder occurred indoors, unlike the others. Factually, that matters because indoor scenes change everything: privacy, time, and the risk of being seen. After this, the canonical series ends. Here we must be careful. We do not have a documented single reason the murders stopped. Common possibilities are discussed by historians: death, imprisonment, relocation. But they remain possibilities, not proven conclusions. So the only fact is, after the canonical timeline, the linked series ended without a confirmed capture. No DNA, no fingerprint comparison as we know it, no CCTV, no modern databases. Investigators relied on patrol patterns, witness descriptions, and the hope that someone would recognize a suspect. And witness descriptions, like Lowende's sighting, were rarely enough to produce a legally solid identification. Another documented challenge: different locations, different streets, and a city that never truly slept. A killer who attacks quickly and disappears into crowded routes can become invisible. And when panic rises, the number of suspicious men rises too. Not because the killer multiplied, but because fear changes what people report. Here is what stands firmly. 5 murders are commonly linked as the canonical series. The double event occurred on September 30th. A portion of Eddowes' apron was found in Goulston Street with chalk writing above it, later removed by order of Commissioner Warren. The "From Hell" letter and kidney package were received by George Lusk, and the kidney's exact origin remains debated. No suspect was tried and convicted for these canonical. It endures because it sits at the intersection of real evidence and missing answers. It shows the limits of 19th century investigation. It shows how public fear can distort a case. And it shows how the absence of a verdict can become its own kind of haunting. There was no arrest that led to a trial for the canonical murders. No conviction, no formal verdict. So the verdict for this case is not guilty or not guilty. It is simply this: unresolved.
If you want more cases examined through evidence and public record, subscribe to The Verdict.